NFL analyst Charles Davis has just released his mock draft 1.0, and boy, it's a doozy. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and talk about Charles Davis 2025 mock draft 1.0. If you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. So as you can see, we are on NFL.com, Charles Davis 2025 mock draft 1.0, and you guys can read the title. A little bit of a sneak peek here, but man, this mock draft is crazy. We're just going to talk about these first few picks in extreme detail. I will say I agree with a lot of his takes in this draft, but the first three picks to me are just a little asinine. So first overall, he has Shedeur Sanders going to the Tennessee Titans. Let me get this out of the way. I like Shedeur Sanders. I do think that he is worthy of a first round pick. Number one overall feels very rich in my opinion. I do think Cam Ward is pretty clearly the better quarterback than Shedeur Sanders. With that said, his explanation does kind of check out in some ways. Brian Callahan came from Cincinnati where he played with Joe Burrow, an accurate quarterback that likes to sit in the pocket. If Brian Callahan is looking for that sort of guy, then I do think Shedeur Sanders is the best option. With that said, to kind of repeat what I said earlier, I do think Cam Ward has the highest ceiling and is arguably the best quarterback in this year's draft class. So for the Titans, who have the number one overall pick, to go out there and take Shedeur Sanders, I think it's a little bit of a reach, and honestly, I would think I would rather them just take the best overall player like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter over a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. But again, Tennessee is probably a team that feels like they can kind of go and start competing for a playoff spot right away with a quarterback that can step in there and instantly play. I do believe that Shedeur maybe arguably is a little bit more pro ready than Cam Ward, because I think for Cam Ward there's a couple things you need to work on, whereas Shedeur, while there is a lot of things to work on, such as, you know, just getting the ball out on time, for Shedeur maybe you feel a little bit more confident about his ability to translate his game early on, more so than Cam Ward. Which that then brings me to number two, the Cleveland Browns taking Cam Ward. Now, I have been hearing by a lot of other analysts and a lot of people who know a lot about football and a lot about the organization of Cleveland that Cleveland does plan on taking a quarterback, especially if Cam Ward is available at number two. Now, the interesting part will be, well, what if Cam Ward goes number one? Will they still take Shedeur or Jackson Dart? Probably. I still assume that they'll probably take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, but it will be interesting to kind of monitor which way they go here. Again, it does sound like Cleveland wants to take a quarterback, so if Cam Ward happens to be available, it would make sense for Cleveland to go ahead and take the guy. And I will say this, there's a lot of question marks regarding whether or not Myles Garrett will or will not get traded. I personally think the Browns should go ahead and try and trade him. In a hypothetical scenario, let's say you get a deal done with Myles Garrett after the trade is over. Let's just assume it's Washington for the sake of the argument. In a hypothetical trade for Myles Garrett to Washington, you're looking at 2 first-round picks, and I would assume that it would be a 2026 first and a 2027 first, and arguably even more compensation than that because of how good of a player that Myles Garrett is. So if you are the Cleveland Browns, you're going to have, hypothetically speaking, 4 first-round picks over the course of the next 2 years to really build around your quarterback in either Shedeur or, in this situation, Cam Ward. I know that Myles Garrett is arguably the best player in the NFL, but 4 first-round picks is a really good way to really surround your young quarterback with talent. You can get a top-tier receiver, you can get some O-linemen, especially because it's not like Cleveland is probably going to be competing anytime soon, so their picks will likely be top 10, and then just never know with Washington, those picks could be, you know, really bad first round picks or maybe decent first round picks. Then at number 3, we have the biggest conversation point of this video. Charles Davis has Jackson Dart going to the New York Giants. He says the last time the Giants went all in on a quarterback from Ole Miss, it worked out pretty well. I know people have not been projecting Dart to go this high, but New York has a screaming need at this position. After passing on Penix, McCarthy, and Nix in last year's draft, the Giants might not feel like they can sit back and wait this time around. Let me get this out of the way. Jackson Dart is not halfway even close to the prospect that Eli Manning was coming out of Ole Miss. To me, this pick, number one, it's not going to happen. And listen, I want to give all the credit in the world to Charles Davis. He knows more about the game than I do. He knows more about the Giants organization and what they might do more so than I do. I fully admit that. But if this happens, this pick would just reek of desperation. And I mean, this is probably a last resort for the New York Giants. I've been thinking about this pick for a while now, and I just really do not think that this is going to happen, nor do I like this pick at all. Listen, Jackson Dart is an okay prospect. I don't have him in my personal top 50 big board, and I know a lot of other people don't. Jackson Dart is somebody who maybe would be in my big board around 75 to 100, somewhere along those lines. And again, I understand why he would be perceived as the third best prospect in this year's class at the quarterback position, because he has a good arm, he has the intangibles. But man, at Ole Miss, he wasn't asked to do a whole lot of NFL stuff, man. He wasn't asked to make, high level, reads. He wasn't asked to make these crazy throws. Like, he was a one read system guy, and obviously he thrived at it. But I mean, when you ask the guy to sit back and actually, go through his progressions and make logical NFL decisions, I mean, I don't know how that's going to work. Now, again, yes, you want to develop him and you want it to work out. But if you're the Giants, you're taking a project quarterback in Jackson Dart. And I mean, honestly, I would rather the Giants just maybe take him in the second round and go after an Aaron Rodgers or a Sam Darnold. Maybe not Sam Darnold, but like a 1-year rental, like a Justin Fields. I mean, Brian Dable and Joe Schoen's jobs are on the line. And I think the funny thing about this argument is when we talk about Brian Dable and Joe Schoen's jobs being on the line, I think sometimes we just look at it from like a game perspective, like the NFL perspective. But if we actually look at it at a human level, these are two dudes who are fighting for their living, right? They're fighting for millions of dollars. They're fighting for their livelihoods. They're fighting to stay on this organization to continue to be on their coaching staff. And don't get me wrong, if those guys were to get fired, they'd be still in the NFL like right away. Like, Brian Dable's a good coach. It just isn't working out for the Giants, it looks like. But if these guys are hedging their bets on Jackson Dart to be their starting quarterback next year, I mean, this is just not going to work out whatsoever. So I don't see the Giants doing this. If I was the Giants in this situation, if Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders are off the board, I would probably give a call to Aaron Rodgers or Justin Fields. And in this spot, I'd probably just go ahead and take Travis Hunter. Because with Travis Hunter, he fills a need at wide receiver next to Malik Neighbors. He also fills a need at corner, which they don't really have a number one corner at this moment. Again, this pick for me, if they actually were to take Jackson Dart third overall, it would reek of desperation and just, it would feel like Will Levis in a sense, because Will Levis was somebody who had some question marks of whether or not he would potentially go early in the first, because obviously in that class you had Bryce Young, you had CJ Stroud, you had Anthony Richardson. Those guys were consensus top 10 picks. And then there was Will Levis, where people were like, maybe this guy could end up falling into that mix there. And then of course he fell to the second round. I kind of think that's what's going to happen with Jackson Dart. I don't know who's going to take him in the second round. It could be the Giants, but yeah, I don't think that he's going to go third overall. I really just do not like this pick whatsoever from Charles Davis. Again, full transparency, he knows more about the league than I do. So for all we know, the Giants may have Jackson Dart third overall on their big board. We just never know. So as I mentioned towards the beginning, after these first three picks, the rest of the draft is actually pretty normal. We'll go through a few picks here. New England Patriots taking Abdul Carter. I mean, this one just makes a ton of sense. Abdul Carter is arguably the best player in the league. The Patriots need to add a pass rush element to their defense. Christian Barmore's a stud, but they don't really have a great edge rusher right now. So Abdul Carter steps in day one. And honestly, this is a bit of a pipe dream at this point for the Patriots. It feels like he's probably going to go number one to the Titans, or even potentially number two to the Cleveland Browns. So if he, for whatever reason, does follow the Patriots without the Patriots having to trade up, I mean, this would be a fantastic way to build something on that defensive line. And yes, you want to build around Drake May, but hypothetically speaking, you can do that in the free agency market where they have like $100 million. 5, you got the Jacksonville Jaguars taking Travis Hunter. This one makes a ton of sense. They desperately need help in the secondary, but they could also use another weapon on offense next to Brian Thomas Jr. Travis Hunter, kind of similar to Abdul Carter, probably will not be available at pick 5, but in a hypothetical scenario where he is, oh my god, the Jacksonville Jaguars would be thrilled to get a guy like Travis Hunter, not just the player on the field, but also the guy off the field who just brings so much energy and juice to an organization. Jacksonville could desperately use that. It could help out Trevor Lawrence. It could help out the defense. This would be a home run pick in my opinion. Next, you have Mason Graham. Now, this pick is actually interesting because the Raiders really don't necessarily need a defensive tackle. Like, they could use maybe some depth or another option next to Christian Wilkins, but you have Max Crosby, you have Christian Wilkins. They're probably going to bring back Malcolm Kuntz or, bring back K'Lavon Chaisson or something like that. But bringing in Mason Graham is just kind of an embarrassment of riches on that defensive line. Now, granted, maybe this is a spot where if the Raiders want to, they could trade back a pick or two to let another team take a Mason Graham. But if this Raiders team wants to just go best player available while, building around, Max Crosby because they just paid him, I think Mason Graham would be an awesome pick. Again, I don't know if Mason Graham will be here because I don't think Jackson Dart goes third. So I kind of think that all these players here are off the board. But in a hypothetical scenario, if the Raiders have Mason Graham on the board, I think the Raiders would probably consider him. I mean, a defensive line of a healthy Malcolm Kuntz, Christian Wilkins, Mason Graham, and Max Crosby, I mean, that's maybe the best defensive line in the NFL. Like, that there's an argument to be made there. Again, you're building a strength that's already pretty strong, and you're not necessarily addressing any of your weaknesses, which would be like receiver, running back, quarterback, corner, those sort of positions. But man, again, when a guy like Mason Graham falls into your laps, I don't necessarily think you overthink it. Again, this could be a spot where maybe they trade down to take a Genty, but yeah, I don't mind the pick at all here. 7, the Jets going Will Campbell. Now, I have seen this a couple times, but I will admit it's not my favorite pick for the New York Jets. I think there's a couple other players that I would have over them. When you hear Charles Davis' explanation, I think it does make a little bit of sense. He says, leading up to the 2024 draft, there was plenty of chatter that the Jets could take tight end Brock Bowers with the top selection, but they opted for Olu Fashanu. Now Tyler Warren is available. The Jets could pounce on the tight end, but I see them once again opting for the bookend blocker. Campbell would significantly improve the Jets' offensive line from the right tackle position, giving them a young, talented set of offensive tackles to build. This one makes a bit of sense. Now, I will say, I don't necessarily think Will Campbell is going to be a tackle at the NFL level because of his arm length. So if that's the case, then if the Jets do take him, they're going to have to stick him out at right tackle. Olu Fashanu being the left tackle, Will Campbell at the right tackle. That could easily work out. And yeah, the offensive line would be nice. I don't love the pick here, though, because there's other players such as a Tyler Warren, which make a lot of sense. Ted McMillan also makes a bunch of sense. If they took Will Campbell in a scenario, I wouldn't hate the pick. I would love the new offensive line that they're building, but I also think there's better, I don't want to say value on the board, but better options for this team on the board. It's kind of like the Raiders, where the Raiders are continuing to adding on to a strength. For the Jets, it's not necessarily a strength, but they would be starting to build a strength in the offensive line, but there's other needs they could look to address, like Will Johnson still on the board, and they could use a corner. So I don't hate the pick, but I don't love the pick either. 8 is Jalen Walker. Now, I have seen this pick quite a bit lately, where the Panthers seem to be really attached to Jalen Walker, and it makes a lot of sense. Jalen Walker is somebody who can play off the edge, play off-ball linebacker. He can be all-around excellent player for this team. Now, he does need a little bit of some development if you want to stick him out as a pure edge, but I think he's somebody who can learn on the job. You stick him out as an off-ball linebacker and give him a couple edge rushing snaps per game. If you want to keep him as an off-ball linebacker, I think he'd be fantastic for the Panthers. The Panthers have a bit of a void on basically every position on the defensive line, so in a sense, Jalen Walker kind of addresses 2 positions with 1 pick, where you can have him play off-ball linebacker as well as potentially throwing him on the edge here and there. Jalen Walker is extremely gifted. He's a freak athlete, so I think the Panthers would be potentially wise to take him. He is somebody who needs some development, and the Panthers have some time to develop the guy, but if this guy reaches his ceiling, he could easily be one of the better players in the NFL. Now you have Mykel Williams. Now I have had in a lot of my recent mock drafts Mykel Williams kind of falling later down the board, but it does seem like the NFL is a little bit higher on Mykel Williams than maybe the media, including myself, are. Mykel Williams instantly steps in and I think will be a dominant run stuffer early on, but when it comes to pass rushing, I think it will take a little bit of time. He was dealing with some injuries last year at Georgia, so do keep that in mind, but he still was able to get, I think, like 6 sacks last year, so he can still be a productive player. Good size, good length. The Saints traditionally like well-sized, big, sturdy edge rushers like a Cam Jordan, for example, and I think Mykel Williams kind of does fit the mold here. Chase Young probably out the door, so they do have a big-time need to give some help up front. Kellen Moore in that defense. I think Mykel Williams could easily be a good start to that defensive line, but I will say, I think there's some other edge rushers with higher ceilings that I would rather have than Mykel Williams, but if they did take Mykel Williams, again, I don't know if I would love it, but I wouldn't hate it necessarily. 10, we have the Chicago Bears taking Kelvin Banks. I have seen Kelvin Banks kind of falling down draft boards in a little bit. I kind of feel like this is a little bit of prospect fatigue, but at the same time, I think there are flaws to Banks' game that do need to be weighed. The Bears have been absolutely aggressive these past few days, addressing their offensive line, primarily the guards. But if you take Kelvin Banks, you're continuing to adding onto a strength of this team, which could potentially become the offensive line. Darnell right at right tackle. You have Joe Thuney at one of your guard spots, Jonah Jackson at your other guard spot. Probably have to figure out your center position, and then maybe it's Braxton Jones who maybe moves into a swing tackle role with Kelvin Banks playing that left tackle position. I think this pick makes a lot of sense. Yes, Ashton Genty's on the board, and maybe the Bears would opt to go running back because they've already done so much work on the offensive line. But if you want to continue to build a good offensive line around your young quarterback, I think Kelvin Banks is a fantastic player. Again, if you guys have not heard, Kelvin Banks is my #1 offensive tackle in this year's draft. #1 offensive tackle. That's because I have Will Campbell as a guard. But if you include Will Campbell, then Kelvin Banks would be my second offensive lineman who would be on my big board. I love Kelvin Banks. Obviously, Texas guy, played 3 years there, was fantastic. I think he's the best pure pass blocker in this draft class. So I think the Chicago Bears would make a lot of sense to take Kelvin Banks here. All right, San Francisco takes Mike Green. I've been hearing really recently that San Francisco plans on taking a pass rusher. And if that's the case, Mike Green might have the highest ceiling as a pure pass rusher in this year's draft class. I do think they have other needs, but if they want to continue to build around Nick Bosa on that defense, and of course Fred Warner, I think adding a guy like Mike Green who presents so so much juice and just an awesome pass rushing element, could really give this Niners defense another, different look to throw at and just give another body out there who could just be super dominant. I do think Mike Green will be an awesome player. Maybe should put on a little bit of weight, but man, you put him next to Nick Bosa and he can be your edge rusher too. Like, this guy is just going to absolutely feast on what is going to likely be your weaker offensive tackle. So yeah, I just love the pick of Mike Green. Obviously, Nick Bosa still there. They could use a defensive tackle, but we'll have to wait and see what they do during free agency. Next up, Dallas takes Ashton Jeanty. Now, I don't think this pick is going to happen because from what I have heard, and again, this is still early in the process, so things could easily change, but I have heard that Dallas does not plan on taking Ashton Jeanty even if he is available. Now, again, that could just be hypothetical coach talk or ownership talk where they're trying to, misinterpret or mislead other teams by saying they're not taking Ashton Jeanty just to take him. But I'm actually kind of in line to believe that they won't go for Ashton Jeanty. For me, it feels like Dallas really does like Rico Dowell, which, I like Rico Dowell too, and I think he's a fine player, but he should not be your running back one. And I don't think Dallas will have him as their running back one, but from what I've heard, they plan on taking one in rounds 2 or 3, which maybe could lead you to a Quinshot Judkins, a Travion Henderson, a Caleb Johnson. With that all said, if the Cowboys were to take Ashton Jeanty, it would be an awesome pick. Ashton Jeanty is arguably the best offensive player in this year's draft class. I think he's a fantastic player. Dallas could desperately use a redown back to pair next to hopefully Rico Dowell if they are able to bring him back. If Dallas can't bring back Rico Dowell, then I do think Jeanty should be the pick because they'll have a massive void at running back. Dallas's offense is at its best when they can physically move the ball down the field with a dominant ground game. Dak Prescott works best in the play action next to a dominant running back. He hasn't had that since 2016 to like 2018-19 Ezekiel Elliott. Since then, Zeke kind of fell off a board. They had Tony Pollard there for a little bit, which kind of added a nice little element to their offense, but it never really was that productive. And then last year with Rico Dowell, they weren't committing to him till very late, and by that point, Dak was already injured. So I think by taking Jeanty, it makes a lot of sense. Support Dak Prescott. You paid the guy, give the guy some new offensive pieces to work with, a new running back, some new receivers, some new offensive linemen. Support Dak Prescott, support Brian Schottenheimer, and you never know, they could be good next year. Dolphins take Armand Membu. This is a pick that I absolutely love. Armand Membu destroyed the draft combine. He's big, physical, and he's also really freakishly athletic. Played at Missouri, was just really solid for most of his time there. With the Miami Dolphins, is a team that likes to get out there and run. They like to do a lot of zone blocking. And I think Armand Membu very well could be somebody who falls into the laps of the Miami Dolphins. Now, I have seen some people have Armand Membu go as high as a top 5 pick. I still think Campbell and Banks should go in front of Membu, but man, if you want a speedy, just freakishly athletic, physical, strong tackle, I mean, maybe you go with Armand Membu. I definitely could see him going very early, and the Dolphins, in my opinion, should be counting their luck if they can get Armand Membu at 13. 14 is Tyler Warren. I talk about this all the time. This is the absolute best pick for the Indianapolis Colts. They have to find a starting caliber tight end, whether it's Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren. This Colts team needs to find a piece that can actually give this offense, I don't want to say a go-to option, but just a consistent, physical, do-it-all like player like Charles Davis says, and that is exactly what Tyler Warren would do. He could be a scapegoat for Anthony Richardson when, Richardson is going through his progressions and can't find a guy. Hey, just give it to Tyler Warren. He can get the ball and make some plays. Anthony's still developing. He needs more time. You need to support him with great players. You obviously have Michael Pittman Jr., you have Adonai Mitchell, you have a couple other guys here and there, but the tight end position has been so bad for this team. Tyler Warren steps in there, gives them a dominant offensive presence who can just completely change the identity of that offense. I really like the pick here. Will Johnson falls to 15. Now, I have seen Will Johnson kind of going down draft boards. I think this is in part due to his performance in 2024, but also in part because he really hasn't done much this offseason. For Atlanta, I still think they need to take an edge rusher. I think that should be the number 1 pick, and if Shamar Stewart is on the board, I think you take him here. But if a talent like Will Johnson falls to you, you need to add somebody next to AJ Terrell. I think it could make some sense. Again, I think Will Johnson probably be off the board a little bit earlier than 15. And even if he is here, I think I might consider Shamar Stewart over him. But again, if you want to go best player available, Will Johnson does make a lot of sense. So I don't hate the pick at all. I think Will Johnson's a fantastic player. Yes, he doesn't have the long speed that you would love, but man, you just watch the film. He can make plays on the ball. He's very sticky in coverage, has really good technique. Had an injury last year, so we'll have to monitor that, but he looks to be okay at this point. 16 Cardinals go at Kenneth Grant. Now, this is an Arizona Cardinals team that just needs to revamp a lot of different positions. A lot of that does include the interior and the edge rushing room on the defensive line. That whole unit could use just bodies. They took Darius Robinson last year, but really hasn't worked out too much. Kenneth Grant steps in there. He's big, physical, gives you a little bit of juice as a pass rusher, but can also be really solid as a run stuffer. He steps in there, will be your defensive tackle one, and then you just kind of hope that you can get something from BJ Ojolari and maybe Darius Robinson develops. So I don't hate the pick at all here for them. I would probably prefer Shamar Stewart or Walter Nolan, but I do like Kenneth Grant a lot, so I have really no issues with this pick. One of those three players makes sense, and they just decided to go with Kenneth Grant. All right, Cincinnati takes Shamar Stewart. This one checks out pretty nicely for me here. A lot of question marks with this Bengals team, whether they're bring back Trey Hendrickson, whether they're going to pay Jamar Chase, are they going to get T. Higgins on a long-term deal. I think one way to kind of add to your defense, which is something they should desperately try to do, would be number one, to pay Trey Hendrickson. I don't know what they're thinking there, but number two, give Trey Hendrickson some actual support. I believe Hubbard just retired, which makes some sense. He had a really down year last year, so he's done with at this point. And Shamar Stewart should be the guy that could easily replace him. Shamar Stewart is big, physical, lacks the productivity, but is a really sharp athlete. This is somebody who's going to take some time to develop. He needs to, round out his skill set nicely. He needs to learn how to turn pressures into sacks. He needs to learn technique things and so on and so forth. But this is a draft where there isn't too many blue chip prospects. And when you have a guy out there who is a good prospect, but not a great prospect, but has the potential to become a blue chip like player because of his potential, then I think you take him over guys with maybe a higher floor, but also a lower ceiling. Like Shamar Stewart has a very high ceiling, but a pretty low floor. So if you're the team like the Bengals who needs to add something on the defensive line, maybe you go out there and just take the best, most talented, athletic player available in a position of need. And I think Shamar Stewart kind of checks off a lot of those different boxes. So I don't hate the pick at all here. 18 Seahawks go Walter Nolan. They need a nose tackle. They need a disruptor up the middle. Walter Nolan could very well be that guy. Man, they'd have a defensive line with some really young studs like Walter Nolan next to Byron Murphy. That could be the future of that defensive line. I like the pick a lot here. I think Walter Nolan's a fantastic player who has some, technique things, like his pad level can be a little bit bad at times. He also needs to learn to use his hands a little bit more, but kind of similar to Shamar Stewart, this guy has all the talent in the world, just needs a good coach to kind of get it out of him. 19, Ted McMillan. This is really shocking that he fell all the way to 19. I have Ted McMillan as my number 2 offensive player in this year's draft class, and I think there should be a lot of teams very interested in the play style of Tetairoa McMillan, but I could see a world where he does potentially fall. Tampa Bay doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless they cannot bring back Chris Godwin, which from what I've heard is what they plan on doing. So if you hypothetically took Tetairoa McMillan, they took somebody last year who I'm blanking on his name, but I'm assuming that he now kind of gets out of the rotation, and then you have 2 long, lengthy, massive receivers like Mike Evans and Tetairoa McMillan, and then you pair him next to Chris Godwin. I don't know. This is a pick where I like the pick, but I would prefer other players. Like Tetairoa McMillan's a fantastic player, but the Buccaneers don't really need more weapons. I would prefer a Jahad Campbell here, or Jahdae Barron, or James Pierce Jr., like those sort of guys. I don't really like this pick here at all for the Buccaneers. Again, I can understand just taking the best player available, and I think Tetairoa McMillan's fantastic. But the Buccaneers, if they bring back Chris Godwin, don't really need receivers. They need to add pieces to the defense and, get cornerback ones, get an edge rushing one. And I don't know. I don't love the pick here. Again, Tetairoa McMillan's a fantastic player. The Buccaneers would be lucky to have him, but Mike Evans is still an absolute stud. Chris Godwin's coming back from injury, but if he comes back healthy, he's a stud. So I don't know. I don't like the pick here at all. 20, you have Nick Eamon-Warrior. This dude is flying up draft boards. He was probably thought to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, but because of the combine and people are starting to pay a bit more attention to his overall size and versatility, he's moving up draft boards. Nick Eamon-Warrior is a big, lengthy, he's like 6'2" or whatever, like 200 something pounds. He's 6'3", 220 pounds, run a 4.38, 20 benches on the bench press reps. I said that terribly. First in production score, first in athleticism score, first in total score. This one kind of checks out. The Broncos could use some other pieces in the secondary, such as a safety. Nick Eamon-Warrior, I think he has flexibility to play a lot of different positions on this defense. Strong safety. He could play a little bit of free safety, but I don't know if I'd really have him playing free, but he can if you want him to. I think he could play nickel corner. Hell, I think he could even play a small off-ball linebacker in certain packages if you really want him to. I just think Nick Eamon-Warrior is such a fun piece to add to a defense where he's big, physical, but he's also really athletic. And outside of that, he also has really good ball productivity. Some technique things he need a little bit of work here, but Denver's one of those teams that can take a player on the defense and just really make them work. So I like this pick a lot here. It's kind of interesting that he goes ahead of Malachi Starks, who was the consensus number 1 safety, but now it looks like he's kind of falling off for some people, and now Nick Eamon-Warrior is sort of taking over that spot. So That's pretty interesting. 21, the Steelers go with Jahdae Barron. I think Jahdae Barron's going to be taken off the board by this point. I think Jahdae Barron is a fantastic player that hopefully will be rising up a lot of people's draft boards. From what I've heard, he's been killing it in interviews. Teams seem to love this guy. Dude ran a 4.39. Like, he answered the biggest question about his long field speed. He answered it instantly. Jahdae Barron is flexibility to play outside corner, play in the slot, play as a safety. The Steelers need a number 2 cornerback next to Joey Porter Jr. And if for whatever reason Jahdae Barron is available, this would be an absolute home run pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, they could go wide receiver, and there's a lot of different options out there, like a Luther Burden or a Matthew Golden. But man, if Jahdae Barron's on the board here, I do not think you overthink it. He is such a good player, arguably the best cornerback in this draft class. I'll just come out here and say it. The Steelers need to address that position, so I absolutely do love this pick here. Chargers take Colston Loveland. This one makes a lot of sense. You need to add an offensive weapon next to Justin Herbert, Michigan guy, Harbaugh guy. This all checks out. Not much to go through here. Packers take Josh Simmons. This is an interesting one here. Packers have 2 pretty good tackles already, so I'm assuming that Simmons would play a guard, or I'm assuming guard, and then you would move in your left guard to play center. I can't remember his name, but I know that he potentially could play center. I don't know. I think that they have other bigger needs here, like defensive line, like an edge rusher or even a cornerback here. So while Josh Simmons is a fantastic prospect, he, I think, is better suited as a tackle more so than a guard, because he's not really as like big as you want for a traditional guard. Like, guards, yes, you want a guard with athleticism, but you want a big, sturdy guard to handle, defensive tackles. And I think Josh Simmons can do so. I think I prefer him to stick out at tackle, and you're not moving out your 2 stud tackles to move inside to play guard. So yeah, I don't really love this pick here. I just don't think it makes the most sense. I would actually prefer maybe like a Tyler Booker or a Gray Zabel or somebody like that. But Josh Simmons is a fantastic player, so maybe just kind of figure it out on your offensive line. Again, I don't love this pick here. I would have preferred a few other players. But, if Josh Simmons is here, they did take him. I wouldn't be mad at the pick. I would just kind of be a little bit curious to see how they address or how they configure that offensive line. 24, Minnesota goes Derek Harmon. Minnesota needs to add some actual pieces on the interior defensive line. Derek Harmon steps in there. He can play a traditional nose tackle. He can play also all sorts of positions on the defensive line. He's big, physical, has some juice, can give you a pass rush element, kind of one of those risers who just had a really good year out of nowhere recently, and now he's moving up to the first round of mock drafts, and I think it checks out. Minnesota needs interior defensive line disruptors. Derek Harmon steps in there and could instantly be a day 1 impact player. 25, Houston goes Emeka Egbuka. This is a pick that I really am starting to fall in love with. It just makes the most sense. I don't think Stephon Diggs returns because Houston probably wants a more surefire, healthy wide receiver 2 next to Nico Collins. Tank Dell is recovering from an injury, so obviously there's some concerns there. Emeka steps in there, can play on the outside, can play in the slot, depending on what you want to do with Tank Dell when he comes back. You have Nico Collins as your true number 1 guy, Emeka as your number 2, and then Tank Dell as your number 3. Yes, they have other needs like offensive line and maybe another interior disruptor, but I don't know. When Emeka Egbuka is on the board here, you want to keep CJ Stroud happy. I mean, man, not to mention Egbuka caught passes from CJ Stroud at OSU. Yes, and this makes a lot of sense in my opinion. 26, Rams go Gray Zabel. Now, they did address part of their offensive line by re-signing Alaric Jackson, but they do have other question marks along the offensive line. Gray Zabel steps in there, can play all 5 positions on the offensive line. I even think that he could play center if you really want him to. I do think that Tyler Booker may be a better fit for the Rams, but I don't mind Gray Zabel one bit. He's fast, he's athletic, he's strong, he's physical. Played at North Dakota State, so we're not talking about the greatest competition in the world, but I don't know. I don't hate the pick here. I actually kind of like the pick now the more I think about it. So yeah, the LA Rams take Gray Zabel, continue to build an offensive line in front of Matthew Stafford. It checks out. Baltimore takes James Pierce Jr. Now, James Pierce Jr. is somebody who was at one point early into this process a first overall pick candidate, and then some things haven't really gone his way. He didn't have the greatest year in 2024. He also has been having some recent off the field concerns from some teams, and now he's kind of fallen to the back end of the first round. If Baltimore can take a guy like James Pierce Jr., I think it would give them a good element as a pure edge rusher. Now, I do question his bend around the corner and whatnot, but you can't deny the productivity. You cannot deny the athleticism that he does possess. He has a good frame, could probably put on a little bit of weight, but if you're Baltimore and you're trying to add a pass rush element to your defensive line, you want to do what the Eagles did to the Chiefs, and you want to do something like that. James Pierce Jr. could very well be the guy. Detroit takes Donovan Jackson. I don't hate this pick at all. Donovan Jackson will play more than likely a guard position. The Detroit Lions have a lot of question marks in the interior of their offensive line. Some players getting a little bit older, some guys hitting free agency. Donovan Jackson steps in there, He's super smart. He can play different positions. He's really physical, very athletic. I like the pick a lot here. Washington adds Matthew Golden. This one's pretty interesting because they just added Deebo Samuel. But if you believe that Deebo Samuel is a bit more of a wide receiver 3 at this point, then taking Matthew Golden makes a lot of sense. You want to build an offense around Jaden Daniels. I mean, man, if you take Matthew Golden, I think it makes a lot of sense. And McLaurin could be your number 1, Golden could be your number 2, and then Deebo plays a bit more in the slot, could just be more of a gadget guy. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, at this point, I think the receiving core is solid right now, but if you add Matthew Golden, it becomes pretty good. I love Matthew Golden. I think he's a fantastic route runner, very solid hands, and I think that he would be a go-to guy next to Terry McLaurin for Jaden Daniels. 30, Buffalo goes Donovan Ezeraku. This is a guy who's also moving up the draft boards, but I mean, if Malachi Starks is available, I think you take Malachi Starks, but if you want a pass rush element, Donovan Ezeraku could be the guy. Donovan Ezeraku, very good athlete, physical, has good size. You know, he's going to struggle against the run because he's not the biggest guy. But again, if you're looking for a dude who can step in there, be a disruptor as a pass rusher, I think Donovan Ezeraku very well could be the guy. He had good productivity for Boston College. Again, against the run, I don't think he's going to play too much, but I think this is more of a second down, third down guy that Buffalo could depend on to get some pressure on the quarterback. Kansas City takes Josh Connerly. Yes, the offensive line was absolutely abysmal last year. You need to add a tackle. You just lost Joe Thuney. So yeah, your offensive line is not looking good right now. So if you're Kansas City, Josh Connerly steps in there and could play tackle, and I think that it could work out there. And Philadelphia takes Jahad Campbell. I love Jahad Campbell. He can play linebacker. He can play edge. The Eagles just re-signed Zach Bonds, so maybe this isn't the biggest need. But if they just want to go best player available, maybe they could go Malachi Starks even. But man, we got to stop letting the Philadelphia Eagles just take best player available and just letting guys fall to him. Alabama, Jahad Campbell, or Georgia's Malachi Starks. I mean, either one of those picks would just make this Philadelphia Eagles team just so much more scarier. Like, this is a fantastic pick. If this actually does happen, I'll be a little bit pissed off because the Eagles just do it every year where they don't really even care if they have a guy in that spot or not, but they just continue to take the best player available when their pick is up, and it always works for them, whether it's Cooper DeJean or Quinion Mitchell or Jalen Carter. And every single time we always sit here and go, why did they let this happen? Like, how did this happen? And it always works out for them. Maybe not always. Like, Nolan Smith hasn't developed to be a great player yet, but he looks like he's going to be an impact player for them moving forward. Yeah, if this happens, this is such an Eagles pick, and yeah, this would piss me off. But you guys let me know in the comment section below what you guys think of Charles Davis mock draft. I think it's not very good, but that's just my opinion. You guys let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.